Well, if you were here, I would just have another offertory and we could go home. But since you're not, we got to wait until the money starts rolling up on March the 6th, and we know it's coming. I am excited about talking about my uncle and my dad today. My uncle John L. Handcock, and I don't know what the L stands for because in the South, they did that a lot because my father's name is Willie C. Williams Sr., and I don't know what the C stands for. Maybe they just had enough energy to just name, like my grandmother had 11 kids. So she says, well, let me just give him an initial. That's good enough. He was born February the 5th, 1904 in Brinkley, Arkansas. As a child, he admired Paul Laurence Dunbar. And Karen and Richard and Wally and I had the privilege of going to Tag Theater last Sunday to see his work, so it was exciting. My grandfather was a landowner, but lost the family's property after my grandfather was killed. And I remember my mom saying, when Papa died, things changed, things got really hard. There are several stories. My mother said that he was thrown out of a buggy. And then there is another story that he was crushed by a wagon pulled by a mule. So I'm not sure exactly what happened to my grandfather. But my feelings, my personal feelings, and usually they're right, is that there was some foul play. My grandfather died in 1924. And before he died, they had a little property, and he was renting out to different sharecroppers. He was also doing wage labor, which means that you could go and work for someone else for, at that time, it was about 75 cents a day or $1 a day. So they were self-sufficient farmers before my grandfather died. So after he died, the family moved many places. There were so many disasters. There was floods in 1927 and 1928, and there was a massive drought. And then there was the man-made disaster called the Great Depression. I believe that my grandfather really, there was some foul play that happened because when he would go to a store, the country stores that they had, he could add up whatever his bill was in his head. And the shopkeepers would try to tell him there was one amount. He says, oh, no, that's not right, because he added it up in his head. And he says, this is the figure that our family owes you. So my uncle, he joined the Southern Tenant Farmers Union in 1935. And he started singing and writing poems that are politically charged. And Karen, you did a fabulous reading of them. Yeah, good work. His intention was that he wanted the Blacks and white tenants and sharecroppers to be joining the union together. That was his vision. Because if you're poor, it doesn't matter whether or not you're Black or white, you are poor. And that was his intention. But there was a lot of resistance. A lot of the white sharecroppers didn't want to join the union if there was a Black organizer, and vice versa. So the end count was 103 unions, that local unions. 70 of them were either all Black or all white, and 73 were all Black or all white, and 30 of them were mixed. There was a lot of ill feelings going on with the union because there was socialists that were leading it and preachers. And it was a foul word to be a socialist even in the 30s. So my uncle, he traveled to all parts of Arkansas before he needed to leave quickly. And in Missouri and Tennessee and Mississippi, and he just signed up everyone, men and women, because the women were out in the fields chopping cotton or whatever the crop was. So they were also joining the union as well, because together they had power. Divided, they didn't. My uncle would always refer to each of them as Mr. or Mrs., never by their first name. He wanted to make everyone feel that they were respected. And by doing so, then he would give them the prefix of Mr. or Mrs. The sharecroppers were politically oppressed, economically exploited, by being overcharged for essentials. As Karen read, they didn't have any food, basically. And the planters just got richer and richer and richer, and the sharecroppers and the tenants got poorer and poorer. So at the end of the season, the sharecroppers usually didn't have any money coming at all, because at the company store, which they were only allowed to shop at, they were only allowed to sell their products to the plantation owner, basically. And so they never got out of the vicious cycle of being impoverished. The government, when the crops went low in cotton, king cotton, the government stepped in and gave the planters money to not plant. So, and that was the AAA, they call it the Agriculture Adjustment Administration. So they paid the planters, and they were supposed to give money to the tenants and the sharecroppers, but that didn't happen. So when they got the money, what they did is they just pushed the sharecroppers right off of the property and told them that they can leave, because most of them didn't have anything anyway, except for what was in the little shacks that they were in. And they had to go to tents, and they had tents along the roads where they could share in being sheltered from a harsh winter. The old adage is divide and conquer. And capitalists, they feel that that's what needs to happen. And that's the reason that they were so upset when members started to join together. And it's really that way now. It's called Striketober. Do you remember that in October? There was huge strikes here last year in October. October in the States as well. The auto workers had not been on strike for 35 years, and they struck because they wanted an increase in salary. And then Kellogg's, they were on strike. because in the Kellogg's company, if you got sick, you were supposed to use your vacation time and not sick leave. John Deere, they were on strike because they wanted to not have any pension set up for the new employees. And so the old employees stuck together, which was wonderful, to make sure that whoever came along after them would at least have a pension. Meanwhile, the CEO got an increase of 161%. Capitalism has impoverished Southern agricultural workers, and very few have benefited from the system. It's actually, capitalism is the new slavery. Sharecroppers is the new slavery. Jim Crow laws are the new slavery. Black township massacres are the new slavery. Mass incarceration of Black men and women are the new slavery. When they are imprisoned, that are privatized, which is capitalistic prisons all over the continent. We see that here when many Hawaiians and other islanders are shipped from here to Arizona, where their friends, family, no one can go visit them because it costs too much for them to get there. I'm going to talk about my dad. And you might be wondering, what is the connection between my dad and my uncle? Well, they both were very committed to social justice, doing the right thing at the right time all the time. Like my uncle, my father was also born in Arkansas in 1911. And at the age of 20, he married my mom, and they had 7 children, which I am so happy to be the last one. And they were married for 71 years. He was also a sharecropper. Something intuitively happened with he and my mom, because they moved to Gary, Indiana, to work in the steel mills, or whatever they're called. And when that dried up, then there was a call from some cousins that lived in San Diego that had just gotten out of the Navy, and put out a call to all of the Handcox family to come to the Promised Land. So my mom and my dad packed up 6 kids and moved to San Diego, California in 1944. He and my mom worked for the Naval Air Station until after the war, and then all the military people came in, and then my father ended up working as a truck driver for the city of San Diego. My father was an exemplary employee. In 35 years, he was never late. They voted him on the union board, and then all heaven broke loose. In the sanitation department, then my father would always say this: all the Negro men are always throwing cans, because years ago, that's what you did. The driver, and then there would be men that would pick up the cans and throw them into the garbage truck. And he picketed, he wrote letters, he protested, he did everything until he got the results that he wanted. And that was for some African-American men to be driving trucks as well as throwing cans. My father demanded in the marginalized communities of San Diego that our streets were clean, just like in the richer and more affluent streets in San Diego. That we had street signs and we had street lights. Where there was danger, we wanted those things, he wanted those things to be taken care of. My father believed in equality, and everyone had the right to enjoy the pursuit of happiness. Unlike my uncle, my father really was a believer in God and extremely religious. And he would say all the time, trust in the Lord with all your might and lean on not your own understanding. He felt that with 7 children, he needed to have God or somebody handling all of this. So he had an expectation of his 7 children. And the expectation was that everyone was going to get a high school diploma. And everyone did. And 4 of my sisters and brothers graduated from college and beyond. That speaks volume for a man and a woman, my mom and my dad, that barely had a 4th grade education. And he was just an incredible being. He would always say, with God's help. And I used to look at him like, God ain't responsible for all of this, you know? But then as I matured, then I really found out that God does have a way with all of this. He had some wonderful sayings. He says, if you're going to help someone, you help them in the way that they want to be helped. Otherwise, you're a hindrance. Another saying, he said, because he wanted us to do what we needed to do regardless. He says, one monkey won't stop a show, and if it does, it's a pretty poor show. And then I added, it would be a one monkey act. Similarities with my father and my uncle. Neither one of them would go along to get along, except my dad with my mom. Speak now, your silence will not help you, and it will not save you. Speak up. Both were union men. Both cared deeply about the least of us, protecting all people from unfair treatment. They were committed to worth and dignity of every human being, no matter the race or class. They believed in collective survival. My uncle wrote, trying to make this world a better place to live in. And this is a quote that he wrote in the book. I want to be remembered as one that volunteered to risk my life to make this world a better world for the workers to live in, as one that was more than glad to lend a helping hand. Let that be our purpose, to let our light shine so that we can give a helping hand to those that are in need. In closing, we will have a song that is somewhat debatable sometimes, but there is a line in it that says, and before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave. Oh, freedom. It was used as a marching song. Now, you might not think that you ever were a slave, but I think that everyone has been a slave some way or another. Either you've been a slave to a job that you hated, Or you might have liked it, but you were a slave to it because you needed the money. You're a slave to a car note or a relationship that no longer works. You're a slave to the idea that you have to be sick or you have to have a disease. Or you're a slave to perhaps the mentality of poverty, lack, or limitation. So when you think, listen to the song, listen to it as if one has had something that they had to release that was enslaving them to that very moment. So let us take a moment and free our minds and hearts of anything that might enslave us. And so it is.